Excellent. Okay, so thank you everybody for attending. Really appreciate it. As I said, we did have to reschedule this one due to illness, but all is good now. Today we're going to be talking about storytelling, magnetic storytelling, no less. How to tell your organizational story and your service user stories to unlock deeper levels of support for your organization. I'm assuming most people here work for a non-profit, whether that's a CIC, even a social enterprise, but most likely you work for a charity. Before I go on, I just want to make a quick statement on the content that we're going to be sharing today. Obviously, this is storytelling. Some of it is quite emotional, largely the point of storytelling. So we're going to cover a couple of themes that maybe a little bit emotional for people in the room. So if that is the case, feel free to duck out at any point. Okay, so before I go on, Steve Jobs was credited as saying the storyteller is the most powerful person in the room. Oh, sorry, in the world, rather. I've got my eye on the waiting room there. The storyteller is the most powerful person in the world, which is quite a big statement. And I'd love for you, just before we move on, just to get an idea of what people's perceptions are of on this. Why do you think he said that? Why do you think the storyteller is the most powerful person in the world? Let's have a think about that and just drop something in the chat there. Anyone got any thoughts on what he might have meant by that? Do you disagree with it? You can change people's perception, shapes ideas and perception, pulls on the emotions. Yeah, because people respond to personal stories. People buy into stories. Yeah, yeah. And you'd like to think that he knew what he was talking about, right? So that's good. That's so it seems like we're all pretty enrolled in this idea that storytelling is powerful. So what we'll do today is we'll go through a few examples of powerful stories. Then I'm going to give you a bit of a framework on how you can tell your own. Before I move on any further, I just want to do a quick introduction to myself. So my name's Matt Saunders. I've worked with third sector organizations for about 7 or 8 years now, mostly UK-based charities. I see my role mostly as helping them with diversifying and strengthening their income through digital design and marketing. So that is things around brand positioning, storytelling, comms, and things like that. Some of the organizations I've worked with, Women's Aid, UK fundraising, various different smaller organizations as well. If you want to find out a little bit more about what I do, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can see my website there as well, mattsaunders.uk. Or if you'd like to watch any previous recordings from these training sessions, just search for Matt Saunders Charity on YouTube. So let's get into this then. What is storytelling? I was tempted to lead by example by actually telling a story, but I think we're going to begin by appealing to the left brain, the logical part of the brain, and just kind of define some of the terms around what storytelling actually means before we get into some examples. So, a lot of this is open to interpretation as well. That's one of the key takeaways. For me, stories are ideas. They're ideas that we have that we then communicate to others to prompt some kind of reaction from them. We commonly tell stories through words, sounds, music, films, images, but also small subtleties, facial expressions, movement, even colors. They all tell a story. They all merge with our experience and our way of thinking and then create some kind of narrative in our mind. And we can see this in this example here. So if you look at that picture, you don't have to share anything in the chat, but you feel free to do so. What do you think that the story could be in this picture? We've got someone, presumably a young woman, standing in a corridor, maybe. Is she sad? Is she relieved? Is she scared? Is she happy? What's the story? Has she just run away from somewhere? Is she waiting? I find this fascinating. Everybody in this room is going to have a slightly different perspective on what this image means based upon the story you're telling yourself. Loneliness, Gemma says. A net domestic violence, safer streets campaign. So this is an image that I found on I just found it on Unsplash, which is a free stock photography website. And there's a reason why I picked it because it feels like there's some emotional stuff going on there. The colors, that sets a tone, I think, for what the story could be. But ultimately, we don't know, do we? So so the idea of stories is obviously to create an emotional response. And this is the point of really what we're going at here, that your organization can use storytelling intentionally to generate an emotional reaction in your audience. And I won't labor the point here, but as very common to see emotions generated like intrigue, curiosity, things like disgust and anger, strong emotions that are going to elicit some kind of response from the viewer or the reader, pride, fear, joy, sadness. I'm sure that you all tell your own stories, and what I would encourage you to do is just think about the kinds of emotions that you're wanting to evoke in the stories that you tell. And I want to just give an example of a video. It's a collaboration with the Samaritans and Norwich City Football Club. Now, if you've seen this one, it was quite popular a year or so ago. Um, and as we watch it, it's only a couple of minutes long, but as we watch it, I just want you to have a think about, not so much a think, but more like pay attention to any emotions that are arising, any feelings that are coming up as you're watching this video. And again, feel free to share in the chat if you wish, but you don't have to. There we have it. Pretty powerful, right? So you can see how storytelling doesn't even need to do much, but it can elicit surprise, negative surprise. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck going up at the end of that, and I've watched this video several times. So I would say that the point of storytelling in a commercial capacity, as a communicator, as a storyteller, is, you have to close the loop. These stories, they open an emotional situation within the viewer, and it's our job to then give them something to do with that. So we don't want to leave people with nowhere to go. If you think about a work of art, whether it's a painting or a film or a piece of music, there's no there's no onus on the artist to give you any sense of closure. You're just left to feel the feeling. But the key takeaway here is that your role as a communicator is to give the reader or the viewer a way to resolve that emotional response. It's our way of earning their support, really. It's if you want to break it down to sort of its basics, it's a transaction, for lack of a better word. And so how to close this loop? When we look at that Norwich City video, there are several ways that they invite you to close the loop after they've told this story and created an emotional response. First one is to look at the hashtags. So hashtag you're not alone or World Mental Health Day. This went all over social media and YouTube. If you watch it and then you feel something, you might then go and look at those hashtags, learn a little bit more. This might be the start of the journey for somebody to learn about mental health. There's also it's the Samaritans. So, people they've got good brand presence. People know the Samaritans. They know that you can call them, or if it's more of an emergency situation, they also put at the end there to call one of the emergency numbers. Donate to Samaritans as well. Now, interestingly, in this video, in this little story, they don't actually make an ask, but it's the Samaritans. They've got a strong presence, and most people have heard of them and they know what they're about. So all they need to do really is associate their name as an organization with that feeling that they create and the theme around it, and that can help to it can help to increase donations for their organization, but also give the viewer something to do with what they're feeling. And lastly, the name of the campaign is check in on those around you. Like, this is a way to close that loop. This is what I did. After I saw this for the first time, I text my brother, see if he's see how he's doing. It's just these little things. They get into your mind and they make you feel something, and then you take action as a result. So as I said a moment ago, works of art leave an open loop, whereas works of impact are intended to close it. It's really worth considering that. And so, yeah, for me, opening with that first question about Steve Jobs' quote, storytellers being the most powerful person on the planet, for me, it's because they're able to move people to act. If you want to change people or change systems or whatever it is, if you want something to change, you can either force it or you can manipulate it or you can create intrinsic motivation. People will move and act on their own feelings far greater, far more likely than any other method of trying to get people to sort of do what you want, so to speak. And storytelling is the thing that ignites that internal motivation. So I want to address some of the skeptics in the room. I'm not saying that anyone here is skeptical of storytelling, but I know that in the sector, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that aren't necessarily bought into this stuff and will push back on it. And I've had this myself working with various different organizations. You will sometimes hear even CEOs say things like, well, our charity isn't about saving the cuddly puppies or anything like that. So why would anyone donate to us? And the common objection is that some causes are not, quote, sympathetic. Things like prisoners, ex-offenders, sex workers, so-called ugly animals. You've got the puppies on one end. You might have some endangered, strange-looking stick insect thing that, some organization is trying to save in the rainforest, and they just think that no one's going to donate because it's not an appealing thing. International aid and refugees, unfortunately, there's a huge political thing around whether we should be helping people in other countries and things like that. Uh, can cause contention and causes that are quite frankly boring, or international research organizations, medical research, stuff that feels so far removed from the individual that they don't even bother telling any stories because, well, they get a lot of money from grant funding or whatever, governments, cool, but they're not interested in trying to develop a donor base or a supporter base because they think that their cause is boring. And so, has anyone experienced this? I'd be keen to hear if anyone if anyone has experienced or works in an organization that might not have a quote sympathetic cause or service user. Or have you never heard this before? Are there no skeptics? Petra, hi.
Hi everyone. I don't think I work for a sort of unsympathetic charity. I work for the Scout Association, but I think people don't think of it as a charity. So there's an element of that kind of re-education that there is a central HQ and all the individual local groups also do their own fundraising, but also that element of how we sell the urgency of the ask because it's a positive story that scouting does amazing things, and by donating, you can help with the amazing thing rather than where I used to work at a children's hospice. If you don't donate, these services don't exist under the
Hmm.
NHS. So I think getting that balance right so that you're not pushing too hard on something, being insincere about the necessity, but there is a definite need for these youth movements to help benefit the future generations.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think some organizations lend themselves more naturally, I guess, to the emotional storytelling side of things. Yeah, I think hospices in particular tend to have a very high proportion of individual giving and legacy donations, as you would expect. I'll give an example here that I thought was quite interesting. Um, because I think that, as I just said there on the last slide, it really all comes down to the story. And there's an example here from the Howard League for Penal Reform. Now, in 2013, the Ministry of Justice, in their infinite wisdom, decided to ban prisoners from being able to receive books from loved ones. And it was some so-called crackdown on perks and privileges, I think they called it. And the Howard League obviously took issue with that. They saw that the prison sentence itself is the punishment. So why stop them from having books inside? In fact, actually, those books were central to their rehabilitation, right? So they launched a campaign against this, and it was called Books for Prisoners, and it garnered a lot of support, from authors and people like that. And there was the hashtag on social media was asking people to share their shelfies, which is obviously a play on the word selfie, which is basically just pictures of their bookshelves. And what that did was eventually one of the prisoners took their case to the High Court, supported by the legal team at the Howard League, and the judge found in her favor, and the prison rules were then changed. And what I love about this is, these campaigns can actually create policy change, you know. But what's really interesting for me is that the focus wasn't on the prisoners or even their well-being, it was on the books. And the appeal they were making was to readers and educators and people that cared about self-education and knowledge. So this is one way of seeing how telling a story can actually not just make an impact, but the story itself doesn't need to center around the beneficiaries or the service users of an organization. It can be applied in many different contexts. So not only did this obviously affect change, it also benefited the charity immensely. Their membership grew by 38%. Their number of Twitter followers grew by 50% and they won an award for this campaign. So it's really worth thinking about how you can tell a story that's relevant to the work that you do in a novel way. And so let's just do a very quick recap on this. So you can use storytelling as a tool to generate emotion. You then close that loop by giving the viewer or the consumer of that story something to do with the emotion that they're feeling. And with the right story, I believe that this works with just about anything. Any questions or comments on what I've shared so far? Is this helpful? Cool. Okay. We will move on. So, writing your own story. So that's the basis for storytelling in itself and the reasons to engage in it. But how do you actually write your own story? Um, there's a really nice framework called the StoryBrand framework. Has anyone heard of this one? Brilliant. And let's put you. I'll turn the session over to you, Annette. You can take it. So I've used this myself a few times. I've simplified it for the purpose of this presentation, and also because I think that you can go quite far into this, and you probably don't need as many steps as the StoryBrand framework offers. Although, I'm not saying not to use it, but I've distilled it into five kind of key steps. The first one is that any story has to focus around a character, and that character needs to want something. Now, for most organizations that rely on donors, it's the donor that's going to be the character within that story. Quite often, companies and charities try to position themselves as the character in the story by telling everyone about themselves and the work that they do. There's a place for that, but actually, we want the character to be the donor or the volunteer, whoever you're wanting to work with, and they need to have some kind of desire. Now, this character has to face a villain. Now, the villain is just a metaphor, but it's something that is standing in the way of the thing that they want. Now, the character then meets a guide. That's where your organization comes into the picture. You are the guide that's going to help them to navigate the terrain and slay this villain and get the thing that they want. You give them a plan, very, very basic thing like donate to us, become a friend, volunteer for us, whatever it is. This is a method that you use to help them on their journey. And finally, the idea is to produce a successful story ending and facilitate a character transformation for that character. It sounds very grandiose and very big. It doesn't have to be, but there has to be some kind of notable change from the A to B points, the beginning and the end. There needs to be something that happens on that arc, and then some kind of transformation that is notable at the end of it. I'm going to give you an example from my own life. I donate to the King's Trust. The King's Trust, if you don't know of them, they basically work with young people to help them build confidence, build career skills, set up their own businesses, and things like that. So start out with the character with a desire. That is obviously, in this case, it's me. And when I was younger, I experienced low confidence, scarcity of opportunities growing up. And I want to see a society where everyone can thrive. I grew up in Grimsby, a small town in the north, on the north coast, the east coast, one of those forgotten coastal towns in the 80s and 90s. And yeah, it wasn't great for someone, wanting to get into the world of work at that time. And so I want to see that change. The villain for me, if you like, is a sense of overwhelmment. It's like I can't change the world alone. I can't raise all the funds needed to improve the education system, create systemic political change, all that sort of stuff. I don't even know what needs to change or how, quite frankly, just being honest, there's many things. But I do know that the King's Trust have some sort of credibility in this area. They've got a proven record of helping young people with their confidence and their career prospects. They are my guide in this story. They make me breathe a sigh of relief that this problem is not unsurmountable and that I can participate in this journey to make the change that I want to see. So the plan is make a monthly donation, help the change the lives of young people. You can engage with the King's Trust. They're a massive organization. You can, run events for them, volunteer at events. You can do mentorship with young people. Um, I choose to give a monthly donation. I hardly have any time having two kids, little kids myself, so it's very difficult, but this is my way of getting involved. That's the plan that they give me as the guide on this journey. And the successful story ending, the transformation, if you like, is going from being worried about the future of young people, feeling like I'm not playing my part, to feeling like I'm contributing to a better society. That's the emotional feeling that I get when I donate to that organization. So they've really taken me on a journey. They've kind of like made me feel a lot better about the potential for the future and for young people simply by giving a monthly amount to them. Does that all make sense to everyone? Any questions or comments on any of that? Is anyone familiar with this framework already or have used it in any way? I'd love to hear if you have. Petra.
Sorry, hello, me again. I have heard of it, but not described in that way, and it's really helpful because, like you say, when you think of it as a story, like with the desire and so on, it doesn't really make any sense. But when you've done it in that example, it's really helpful.
Cool, thank you. Um, Robin, have you seen the film Finding Joe? No, I haven't. You have to drop in the chat what it's about, and I might see if I can watch it. Rachel, I'd love to hear about applying the framework in a corporate partnerships context. Yeah, that is a great question. I would, well, we're going to do an exercise in a minute, but essentially, all you're doing is switching out that character for the person that you want to appeal to in terms of a corporate partnership. What's their goal? What is it that you can help with? And how do you help them? And then you satisfy that emotional need that they have because we're all people and we all have, regardless if it's a commercial a commercial arrangement or not, which it obviously would be, but there's an emotional undertone to that that is being met somewhere along the way. A lot of people do not know it's formerly the Prince's Trust. Yeah, sorry, I should have said that. Yeah, it used to be the Prince's Trust. Now it's obviously the King's Trust. Cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I will share this framework with you, and we'll do a short exercise, just to get you thinking, really. And yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through this framework. So we start out with the character. That is, it's probably what we call an ideal donor profile. That is somebody who you want to reach, somebody who you want to give to your organization. Doesn't have to be monetarily. It could be volunteering time. Or, it could be, it gets a little bit more difficult when you get into the area of service users, but it could be a service user as well. You tell your stories in different ways, right? So it's worth just bearing that in mind. Um, to answer the question, what's standing in the way of that desire, we just ask what's blocking the person from getting what they want or affecting the change that they want. They meet the guide, which is you. That's where your organization comes into the picture. What is it that makes you the best guide for them? What relevant case studies, credentials, or experience do you have? What is your plan for them? How can this person engage with you? What can they do to help you achieve what they want? And I want to put a bit of an emphasis on the word they there as well, because a lot of the times there is an assumption that the donor wants the same as what you want. And whilst that is broadly true, donors also have their own emotional needs, their own desires, their own ideas for how things could be. If we go back to that example of the Howard League, if you're really enrolled in supporting the welfare of prisoners and you want to change conditions for them, that might not resonate as well as here is a campaign on sending them books and all of the stuff around that. So you've got to think about what the donor wants, not necessarily what you want as an organization. That's quite a big thing to consider if you haven't already considered that. And finally, what would a successful ending look like to the person? What would the story ending look like? Once the desire has been met, what change has occurred? Now, what I would do is I'm going to drop into the chat a link to a framework that we can that we can use. So have a look at that. If anyone's having problems accessing that, just let me know. And yeah, if you're up for it, you can download that file or make a copy of it into your own Google Drive. And what I'll do is I'll put ten minutes on the clock and we'll have a go at this just individually and see. Obviously, this is quite a big piece of work and it's not something you can knock out in 10 minutes, but maybe if there's a few ideas that have come to you now through this conversation, there's something that you can work with. So if you're up for that, we'll do it. If not, go get a cup of tea or something. But I'm going to put the timer on for 10 minutes, and we'll come back and see what people have come up with. Any questions before we do that? No? Okay. I'm going to set the timer. I'm going to set the timer now, so we'll see you in 10 minutes. How did you find that? Trigger any ideas for anyone? I'd love to hear if there's anything new come through from that exercise. Or maybe it just reaffirmed
Yeah,
what
hi
you were
Matt.
already doing. Hey, Sarah.
Hi, yeah, I did it based on maybe a potential volunteer for our company. Because there's got to be loads of people out there that have lots of skills they can bring to the team. Not sure if I've done it right, but I think the thing that was probably the villain for them would probably be their own confidence on not knowing that they've got enough to bring to the team.
Mm.
Um, and then the guide from us would be to encourage them to have a go, give them a trial, and eventually they would become successful and we'd be happy and they'd be happy. That was what I kind of did.
Yeah, that sounds, I like that. Yeah, that's really good picking up on that aspect of confidence there and addressing that head on, maybe by showing stories from other people that didn't feel so confident, but now a year later they're feeling great. Or do you know what I mean? Those kinds of things. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good. Anyone else got anything to share on that? Was it a useful exercise? Anyone think it's not helpful? Because sometimes I know that pe some people see these frameworks and things as a bit restrictive. But yeah, anyway, I would encourage you if you found anything from that, maybe put some time aside with your team. And he says it was useful but challenging. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's got to be challenging. This is the yeah. If it's too easy, then it's probably not as going to be as impactful as you like, as you'd like it to be, rather. Cool. Okay, so I've only got one last little bit to show you, which is basically I want to give you an example of leveraging that story to prompt action. Now, the example that I've got is again from the King's Trust. It's not the most emotive one, to be honest with you. It's not really a story, but if you think about this in the context of their organization and all the stories that they tell that are kind of scattered across their social profiles and on their website and things like that, it kind of all starts to build a picture. So I just found this on their Facebook page, which says shop to change a girl's life. Then when you click into that, you have a landing page and it's got some stuff on there. It's got some service user testimonials. And they've got here the impact of Change a Girl's Life, which I guess is the name of their campaign. And they've included some stuff in there like some research. They talk about their methodology, which is courses and employment opportunities. And then they say we need your support to help more young women build a better future for themselves. So they've kind of hit a few notes there around credibility. They're speaking to an emotional feeling about, helping young women to build a better future for themselves. I think if that's something that you're passionate about, then it's you can connect the dots very easily. And then when you go through to that, they've listed three very clear ways. Host to change a girl's life, which I think is like a donation-driven breakfast morning that you can host. Shop because they've got an online store, and then there's the donate channel as well. So they have kind of like this broad brush thing about helping young people with careers and confidence. They have a little story here around changing a girl's life, and it's illustrated by the three young women in the picture. And then they've got some stuff around the research and how they actually help people with courses and employment opportunities. And then they have an ask, which is a way to get involved, and they give you three clear paths to do that. So if you connect all of the dots, it can be quite a powerful experience from a user, from a donor experience angle, but it can also be really supportive of the charity's aims as well. If you imagine deploying something like this to various different types of donor groups across your organization, across the different channels, and have them all operating in tandem, can be quite overwhelming to think about that. But if you build it up over time, you can build quite a good system really for welcoming in new supporters. So just a full recap on this, storytelling in a nutshell. Use storytelling to generate an emotional response in the person who is watching or reading the story. As commercial storytellers, as communicators, it's our job to close that loop by giving them something to do with the emotion that you have opened. And this works with anything with the right story. Now, sometimes people think, well, we don't want to be manipulating people and all this sort of stuff. But if you just tell a true story that is true to you and it feels good to you, even if it's a really negative story, but you've got a solution to that problem, don't shy away from talking about it and sharing it and creating emotional reactions in people, because that is how you find the people that want to work with you and support you and solve the problem that you're trying to solve. So how to tell your story? First of all, we want to identify the main character and position yourself as a guide to help them achieve what they want. Again, emphasis on what they want, not necessarily just what you want them to do, if that makes sense. Give them a way to close that loop on whatever story it is that you tell them. And yeah, this is an opportunity to create sort of an upward spiral for any journey that you take people on. Try and capture that full experience, capture it in case studies, service user stories, and then you can feed that back into your storytelling process, and you're always creating new stories to tell. So it's just like an ever expanding activity. So that's the end of the presentation. I'd love to hear if anyone has any questions on any of that or any comments. Have a look at the chat. Lindsay, it's really useful and interesting to change the perspective away from us as a charity and focus on prospective partners, etc. Yeah. So by that, do you mean positioning the solution towards what the partner wants rather than what you want as an organization? I'm going to
Yeah,
assume I'm going to go on.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, because we offer our charity itself we're fighting food waste and feeding people with the surplus that we rescue. But in tandem with that, we offer a give and gain program for volunteers who've struggled for years to get work. And they can come and volunteer with us, but get training, and then we'll write references for them as well. So
Right.
I've always struggled to find a sexy way of telling that story, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think that might be it.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, what I said earlier about unsympathetic but unsexy stories also work. We can always find some string to pull on that's gonna make things move forward. Very thought-provoking, especially thinking firstly about the donors rather than the charity or beneficiaries. Yeah, yeah. If you haven't read it, there is another book I recommend called Great Fundraising Organizations by a guy called Alan Clayton. It's very recently published, but he talks at length about how donors are they're a different audience to your service users, and they have their own emotional needs that we have to respond to. And when you think about it in that way, two segmented user groups, if you like, service users and donors, they may have different needs and different wants, even though they're both feeding towards the same mission that you're working towards. It's a different comms angle, really. Gloria. So the book it's called Great Fundraising Organizations. And yeah, the StoryBrand book is the framework that I use there. Okay, everyone. Unless anyone has got anything else to contribute or ask, we'll call it a day. All good? Nice one. Thank you. Good to see everyone. Stay tuned because I'll be sending out invites to upcoming webinars. And if you enjoyed this, you can find the rest on as recordings on YouTube as well. So I hope that was helpful, and I will hopefully speak to you again soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye bye.
Have a good day.
Bye bye.